He hated change. He saw telephones, cars, and electricity as useless. While the world rushed into the 20th century, one man stood still, trapped in the rituals of a vanishing age. This was Franz Joseph, Emperor of Austria, King of Hungary, ruler of an empire stretching from the Alps to the Carpathians, from Bohemia to the Adriatic Sea. For 68 years, he occupied one of Europe's most powerful thrones. Yet he lived as though modernity itself was an enemy at the gates. The paradox is striking. How does a man who despises progress survive 7 decades of accelerating change? How does an emperor who treats his throne like a clerk's desk hold together an empire of 12 languages, dozens of ethnic groups, and mounting pressures that would eventually tear it all apart? The answer lies not in brilliance or vision, but in something else entirely: routine, duty, an almost inhuman capacity to endure. To understand Franz Joseph, you must begin with the moment he became emperor. The year was 1848. Europe was on fire. Revolution swept through Paris, Berlin, Vienna, Budapest, Prague. The old order was collapsing. Kings fled their palaces. Constitutions were demanded in the streets. In Vienna, crowds stormed the imperial residence. Soldiers fired into protesters. Blood ran in the cobblestones. The emperor, Ferdinand, was a gentle, well-meaning man, but he was also mentally unstable, physically frail, and utterly incapable of ruling during a crisis. The imperial family made a decision. Ferdinand would abdicate. His nephew, a young archduke named Franz Joseph, would take the throne. Franz Joseph was 18 years old. Imagine that moment. You are barely an adult. The world around you is chaos. Your own family's survival is uncertain. And suddenly, you are responsible for an empire of 37 million people. From that first day, Franz Joseph learned a lesson that would define his entire life. Change brings instability. Instability brings revolution. Revolution brings death. Therefore, change must be resisted at all costs. He was crowned on December 2nd, 1848. There was no grand celebration, no triumphant ceremony. Just a frightened young man in military uniform, surrounded by advisors who told him to crush the revolutions without mercy. And he did. Austrian troops marched into Hungary. They hanged rebel leaders. They restored imperial control. The emperor learned that force, not compromise, was how you kept an empire together. But what kind of man was this emperor? If you met Franz Joseph, you would not see majesty. You would see a soldier, a bureaucrat, a man who dressed in military uniform every single day of his life. He wore the same style, the same colors, the same decorations, year after year after year. There was no variation, no fashion, no personal expression, just the uniform. His daily routine became legendary. He woke at 4 in the morning. Not occasionally. Every day. 4 in the morning. He washed with cold water. He dressed in his uniform. By 5, he was at his desk. Not a throne. A desk. Piled with documents, reports, petitions, letters. He read them all. He made notes. He signed papers. For hours. 6 hours. 7 hours. Sometimes more. He took a brief lunch. Then back to the desk. More papers. More decisions. More endless administrative work. He did not enjoy art. He did not read novels. He did not attend the theater unless protocol demanded it. When he did, he often fell asleep. Music bored him. He had no hobbies, no passions. Work was everything. The empire was everything. And the empire, to Franz Joseph, was not a living, breathing organism of people and cultures. It was a machine that required constant maintenance, constant attention, constant control. This was a man who once said, regarding the telephone, that he saw no purpose in it. Why would you need to speak to someone who was not in the same room? Send a letter, use a messenger. The old ways worked. Why change them? When automobiles appeared in Vienna, he dismissed them as noisy, dangerous toys. He preferred horses. When electric lights were installed in the palace, he complained about them. Candles and gas lamps were sufficient. Why this obsession with new inventions? To Franz Joseph, the modern world was not progress. It was disruption. And disruption led to instability. Instability led to revolution. He had seen it. He had lived through it. He would spend his entire reign preventing it from happening again. But while Franz Joseph worked at his desk, signing papers and maintaining order, his personal life was crumbling. If his public life was defined by routine, his private life was defined by death. In 1857, his brother Maximilian married a Belgian princess. Maximilian was charming, cultured, artistic, everything Franz Joseph was not. While Franz Joseph buried himself in paperwork, Maximilian traveled, built palaces, dreamed of grand projects. Eventually, those dreams led him to Mexico. In 1864, French Emperor Napoleon III convinced Maximilian to accept the throne of Mexico. It was a disaster from the start. The Mexican people did not want a foreign emperor. Resistance was fierce. France withdrew its support. By 1867, Maximilian was captured by Republican forces. He was given a trial. Then he was taken to a hill outside the city of Querétaro. 3 rifles fired. Maximilian, Emperor of Mexico, brother of the Emperor of Austria, was dead at 34. Franz Joseph received the news by telegram. He showed little emotion publicly. He returned to his desk. He signed more papers. But those who knew him said he was never quite the same afterward. 10 years later, in 1889, another tragedy. This one closer, more painful. Franz Joseph's only son, Crown Prince Rudolf, was found dead in a hunting lodge called Mayerling. He was 30 years old. Next to him was the body of his young mistress, Baroness Mary Vetsera. She had been shot in the head. Rudolf had then turned the gun on himself. The details were hushed up. The imperial court released a story about a heart attack. But everyone knew. The crown prince, heir to the empire, had killed himself. Why? The reasons were complex. Rudolf was intelligent, liberal, frustrated by his father's rigid conservatism. He wrote articles under pseudonyms criticizing the empire's policies. He drank heavily. He used morphine. He was trapped between duty and despair. And when despair won, he chose death. Franz Joseph learned of his son's death early in the morning. He went to his desk. He worked. Later, he reportedly said to an advisor, "Nothing has been spared me in this world." But publicly, he remained composed, dutiful. The empire required an emperor, not a grieving father. So he continued, more papers, more routine, more work. And then, 9 years later, in 1898, the cruelest blow of all, Franz Joseph's wife, Empress Elizabeth, known as Sisi, was assassinated. She was 60 years old. She was walking along the promenade in Geneva, Switzerland, preparing to board a steamship. A young Italian anarchist named Luigi Lucchini approached her. He carried a sharpened file, a makeshift weapon. He stabbed her once, directly in the heart. The wound was so precise, so deep, that Elizabeth did not even realize she had been stabbed. She collapsed a few minutes later. By the time doctors arrived, she was dead. Franz Joseph received the telegram at his desk. He read it. He stood. He walked to a window. He looked out at Vienna. An aide later recalled that the emperor said, very quietly, "You will never know how much I loved this woman." Elizabeth had been the love of his life. Beautiful, unconventional, restless, she was everything he was not. Where he loved routine, she craved freedom. Where he buried himself in work, she traveled the world. Their marriage had been difficult. She spent years away from Vienna, moving between palaces, traveling to Greece, to Hungary, to anywhere but the stifling imperial court. But Franz Joseph adored her. He wrote her letters. He waited for her. And now she was gone, murdered by a man who did not even know her. Lucchesi later said he had originally planned to kill a different royal. Elizabeth was simply convenient. Franz Joseph was 68 years old. His brother was dead. His son was dead. His wife was dead. And he was still emperor, still at his desk, still signing papers, still maintaining the illusion of control. But the empire itself was dying, slowly, quietly, inevitably. While Franz Joseph clung to the past, the forces of the future were gathering strength. Nationalism was spreading. Czechs wanted independence. Hungarians wanted more autonomy. South Slavs looked towards Serbia. Italians in the empire resented Austrian rule. Jews faced increasing anti-Semitism. Socialists organized workers. The empire was not one people. It was a collection of peoples, held together by force, by bureaucracy, by the inertia of history. And that inertia was running out. Franz Joseph saw the cracks. He ignored them. Or perhaps he simply did not know how to fix them. His solution to every problem was the same: more work, more routine, more control. When asked about reform, he hesitated. Change was dangerous. Better to maintain what existed. Better to hope the old ways would hold. Meanwhile, technology accelerated. In the 1890s, automobiles appeared on Vienna's streets. Electric trams replaced horse-drawn carriages. Telephones connected offices. Typewriters replaced handwritten letters. Skyscrapers rose in New York and Chicago. Airplanes took flight. The 20th century was arriving, loud and unstoppable, and Franz Joseph sat at his desk, writing by hand using a quill pen as though it were still 1848. His advisors tried to modernize. They installed a telephone in the palace. Franz Joseph refused to use it. They suggested he travel by automobile. He preferred his carriage. They urged him to embrace new military technology. He trusted the tactics of the past. The empire was falling behind, economically, technologically, politically. But Franz Joseph would not change, could not change. He was 80 years old now, then 85, the longest reigning emperor in Austrian history, a living relic. And then, in 1914, the world exploded. In June, Franz Joseph's nephew, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, traveled to Sarajevo. Franz Ferdinand was now the heir to the throne, since Rudolf was long dead. He was inspecting military maneuvers in Bosnia, a recently annexed province. On June 28th, a Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip stepped forward with a pistol. 2 shots. Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie were both killed. The assassination sent shockwaves through Europe. Austria blamed Serbia. Serbia had Russian support. Germany backed Austria. France and Britain entered on the other side. 1 month later, the First World War began. Franz Joseph did not want this war. He was 84 years old. He was tired, but his military commanders insisted. Serbia must be punished. Austria's honor demanded it. The empire's survival required a show of strength. And so, in late July 1914, Austria declared war on Serbia. Within days, all of Europe was at war. Millions of men marched to the front. Trenches were dug. Artillery fired. The old world of emperors and kings and empires was about to destroy itself. Franz Joseph watched from Vienna. He attended military briefings. He signed documents authorizing troop deployments. But he was increasingly frail. His hands shook. His eyesight was failing. He still woke at 4 in the morning, but now he needed help to dress. He still went to his desk, but the work exhausted him. The war dragged on, month after month, year after year. Casualty lists grew longer. The empire's resources strained, and Franz Joseph, the man who had held the throne for 68 years, was dying. He died on November 21st, 1916. He was 86 years old. The official cause was pneumonia, though really, he died of old age, of exhaustion, of a lifetime spent carrying the weight of an empire that no longer fit the world around it. He died in his bed at the Schönbrunn Palace, the same palace where he had spent most of his life. His last words, reportedly, were about work. "I must keep working." Even at the end, duty came first. His death was marked with official mourning. Bells tolled across the empire. Soldiers wore black armbands. But the war continued, and the empire continued to fracture. Franz Joseph's great-nephew, Karl, became the new emperor. He was young, inexperienced. He tried to negotiate peace. He tried to reform the empire, but it was too late. The forces Franz Joseph had spent his life resisting were now unstoppable. 2 years later, in November 1918, the First World War ended. Germany and Austro-Hungary were defeated. The empire collapsed. Hungary declared independence. Czechoslovakia was born. Yugoslavia emerged. Austria itself became a small republic. The Habsburgs were exiled. 600 years of dynastic rule ended. The empire Franz Joseph had worked so hard to preserve vanished in a matter of weeks. And so we are left with a question. What do we make of Franz Joseph? He was not a tyrant. He did not seek glory or conquest. He was not corrupt. He did not live in luxury. He worked harder than almost any monarch in history. He endured unimaginable personal tragedy. And yet, his legacy is one of failure. He presided over the decline and eventual destruction of one of Europe's great empires. He resisted change when change was necessary. He clung to the past when the future was inevitable. Perhaps that is the real tragedy. Franz Joseph was a man of duty, of discipline, of routine. In another age, those qualities might have made him a great emperor, but he ruled during a time of transformation. The world needed leaders who could adapt, who could imagine new possibilities, who could bridge the old and the new. Franz Joseph could not be that leader. He was the emperor who hated the future. And in the end, the future destroyed everything he tried to preserve. He outlived his brother. He outlived his son. He outlived his wife. And he outlived his empire. When he died in 1916, he took with him the last remnants of a world that had already ceased to exist. The empire followed him 2 years later, collapsing into the chaos of the 20th century. The man who feared change had spent his life trying to prevent it, but change came anyway. It always does.